Okay, so next we're going to talk about lenses. We're going to need to kind of define some important terms to understand what's going on with lenses. And at first it might be a little bit confusing, but hold on with me and we'll get to a place where it kind of makes sense what all this stuff means. All right, so first off, when we're talking about lenses, we are also talking about focal length. And that's because the focal length of a lens, which is expressed in millimeters, is how we describe lenses. So when you hear people say 16 millimeter or 35 millimeter or 50 or 70 or 200 millimeter, we're talking about how big that lens is, and specifically the distance from the lens optical center to the image plane in the camera. So when we're talking about image plane, that would be this right here, and that image plane is where your sensor is if we're talking about DSLRs or mirrorless cameras. Your image plane would be where the film is if you're talking about an SLR. And it's being measured from right around over here. So when you hear that millimeters, that's the distance from this area to this area. Okay, so next we need to talk about angle of view. Now the angle of view is the angle of your view, okay? So when we're talking about wide angle lenses, our angle of view is really wide. We're seeing way out here. When we're talking about normal lenses, our angle of view is kind of where our eyes would naturally see, so around here. And then if you're talking about a narrow angle of view, you're talking about telephoto lenses. So we have a narrow angle of view. And this little chart here is pretty helpful because you can see this is the 7.5 millimeter. So that's a really short lens, but it has a very wide angle of view. And this is the same scene photographed from the same place, but moving to different millimeter lenses, and so you're getting a narrower and narrower and narrower angle of view. All right, so let's talk about this a little bit more. This is going to make sense, I swear to you. All right, so let's talk about wide angle lenses. Wide angle lenses are generally, the focal length is 7 millimeters around to 28 millimeters. Let's see, so 7.5 is the widest one in this example. And that's around what I've seen, I think, is the widest. There probably is a wider one by now, I'm not sure. But then we have to 28 millimeters. So if we go back to our example here, so around here to around here, these are all considered wide angle lenses. They're called wide because the angle of view is wider. And something to know about wide angle lenses is that it does distort objects that are closer to you. So if you've ever seen like photos taken with a fisheye lens, which this would be an example of this one right here, if there's anything super close to the lens, it has that weird bubble fisheye look, okay? So that's that distortion, and that could be really cool looking sometimes, but it can be kind of weird looking too, depending on your subject. Most people who want a flattering portrait, let's say, don't want that wide angle look. If you think of, things that are closer to you, let's say specifically that your client is a little sensitive because they have a really big nose. If you use a wider angle lens and they're looking right at you, that nose is going to be closest to you and it's going to look bigger. So they're not going to be happy with that photo. Now, at the same time, there's some photographers who use it for an artistic effect with portraits. Platon is a photographer where he does some really cool photos with musicians where he's using a wide angle lens, and so maybe the head of the guitar is super close to the lens, so it looks really big and distorted, while the person's a little further back and looks a little bit more normal. So it can be used in an artistic way as well. But in general, it's great for landscapes, cityscapes, and interiors. Interiors is a big one because if you're trying to get a photo of an entire room, it's hard to get that without a wide angle lens. So you'll see this used a lot for real estate photography. All right, so next let's talk about normal lenses. So this is generally 35 to 55 millimeters, and again, it's called normal because that's about your field of vision. So if you put your arms out and you move, you look straight ahead and you move your arms until they're right outside of your view, then that would be about what a normal lens is, right there. It's one of the original types of lenses, so it's great for all kinds of photography. We're really used to seeing things in this way because it's how we see things, so it does have a very comforting normal type of feel to it. It's used a lot in landscapes, street photography, where you're just going around the world trying to snap snapshots of the everyday life going on, and environmental portraiture. Environmental portraiture, if you're not aware of this term, is kind of like a combination of a landscape shot with a person in it, and it's really about helping communicate that person and their surroundings and their relationship to their environment around them. So for example, if you were doing a portrait series about a famous chef, you'd want to get a shot of them in their environment, in their kitchen. So this would be a good time to use a lens like this. All right, and let's go look at the normal lenses up here. So we just have the 35 and the 50 right here. Again, it's just our normal field of view. Next, let's talk about telephoto lenses. So generally, focal length is going to be 70 millimeters and higher. So we're starting to look at those really, those longer lenses. Called telephoto because the angle of view is narrower than our eyes. So, if you're probably thinking of like a zoom lens or something, right? Where it's zoomed in, where it's really just that the angle is narrower that it's being captured. It does compress space, meaning objects that are far away from each other will look closer when you use a telephoto lens. And it's really great for getting closer when you physically can't. Some examples of this is sports photography. You don't want to get hit by the ball or whatever, so you're on the other side of the field and you have to get a photo right down there. That's when you have those giant telephoto lenses. Macro photography, when your subject is really small and you can't just get close up on it, you need to actually use a telephoto lens to have a smaller angle of view, so you're seeing and looking like it's getting a lot closer. And then animal photography is huge for telephoto because you don't want to scare them away, or you just can't get close enough to them. Now, telephoto lenses are also used by many portrait photographers. A really popular range is 70 to 105 millimeters. So you'll usually hear people talk about 70s, 85s, or 105s for their portrait lenses. And that's because they are flattering to most faces. And along with that, it's more comfortable for your subject. Instead of photographing someone with a wide angle lens where you have to be this close to them, if you're further back, it makes it a little bit more comfortable for people and they can relax and you get a better look from it. And also this causes less depth of field. Now we'll go over depth of field soon enough, but just know that it makes it easier to blur the background, and so they stand out from the background a little bit better. Okay, so now looking at these three different types of lenses, wide angle, normal, and telephoto, let's look at this next chart and kind of apply this. All right, so this is really handy. So we have a 16 millimeter, 35 millimeter, 50 millimeter, 85 millimeter, and 200 millimeter shots here. And as we're looking at this, you can also see that they've taken a photo with the person in their surroundings. They've taken a photo where the person, their whole face is filling the frame. And this is a photo of the photographer showing how close they had to be to their subject to fill it with their subject's face. So let's go back up here. So you can see here 16 millimeter, there's that distortion, that wide angle distortion. The area around her has this, leaning type of look. That's because of that wide angle lens working. And when she gets close to her, when she's trying to fill the frame with her face, you can see how distorted her face looks, okay? And how close she had to be to fill her frame up with the face. All right, Moving down, so we have the 35 millimeter. Now something else I want to point out, if you remember earlier, I said that telephoto lenses compress space, meaning objects look closer to each other than they really are. Let me actually move this up here for a second. Okay. So let's take a look right here. See this tree back here, how far it is in the wide angle shot? And now just that 35 millimeters, look how much closer it looks now. And if we keep going down, you'll see as we get to a larger and larger millimeter, that tree is looking closer and closer and closer. And you can't even barely see it now there, but it's compressing that space between the subject and the background. Okay. So here we have the 50 millimeter, 35 and 50. You can see there's still some distortion. It's starting to look better. And you can see on this side, she's, she doesn't have to be as close as she's using these larger millimeter lenses. And I think we can all agree that this 200 millimeter, it is the most flattering so far out of all the lenses. Works out pretty good, right? And again, to point out that you don't have to be as close to your subject, even with the 85 millimeter. She's kind of close, but not nearly as close as that wide. That's really uncomfortable, right? All up in your space. All right, so that's the basics of lenses. I hope that all made sense. And, feel free to, really study and look over this stuff. This is really just general information on lenses. We're going to do a deeper dive later on in the semester.